All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to another episode of my podcast, Every Which Way. My name is Dana, and today is a special day. Not only is it right before Lughnasadh, which is one of the 8 Sabbats, but I also have a treat for you. So when coming up with this podcast, part of my thing that I wanted to do was every once in a while I wanted to do something that touched on the supernatural or the kind of creepy or even a little scary, because I love that stuff. I mean, Halloween is my favorite holiday. I love horror movies. I love being spooked and scared. So I was like, why not every couple of episodes do like a spook one? And I was like, but I don't want it to, just be every 10, or I initially, thought of doing it every 13 because 13 is one of my favorite numbers, and, it's considered a spooky number and all that. And I was like, no, because I don't want to have to do that. And then I was like, one of the things that I like to do on and around the Sabbats is watch kind of spooky movies or read spooky stuff. I mean, I do this all year round, but it's like, why don't I just do a spooky episode every Sabbat? And then I was like, what am I going to call it? What am I going to name it? And for a while, I was flip-flopping back and forth between Sabbat Spooks and Sabbat Scares. But I firmly have settled on Sabbat Spooks. So, this is episode 1, the first in the series of Sabbat Spooks. Before I actually get into the topic at hand, I want to ask you all a very, very important question. How are you doing? How have you been since last I talked at you? How's everything been going? Have you been doing all right? Have you been taking care of yourself? What are you drinking right now? Are you drinking a nice cool glass of water or a nice hot cup of tea or something? I myself currently have a little can of iced coffee, but it's a Twix iced coffee by Victor Allen's. That's what the can says. And I bought it yesterday when I went out to the dollar store. And the main reason why I went to the dollar store is because they started putting out some Halloween stuff, and I picked up a couple of cool little things there. And I saw these, and I was like, I do love me some Twix. So I'm going to pick myself up a can or two. And I did, and I had the first can this morning, and now I'm having the second can because, well, it is genuinely good. I was quite surprised by it. So it's literally like a liquid Twix. It's very good. If you like iced coffees or something like that, I recommend giving it a go. Let me know what you think. And not just that, I went out to the store and I bought some things to make a nice Lughnasadh soup for tomorrow for dinner. And today I baked a apple tart, and it didn't really turn out the dough wasn't long enough. I didn't roll it out long enough, but it still looks and tastes pretty darn good. And I took a picture of it and posted it on the Facebook page for this podcast. So yeah. Alrighty. So, what am I going to be talking about on this, the very first episode of Sabbat Spooks? The very first installment, let's say, of Sabbat Spooks. Well, like my other topics for the most part, I have a little ceramic pumpkin, and I call it Pumpkin Jack. And this I've had for quite some time. My mother bought it for me back when I was just a teenager, many, many moons ago, I assure you. And it originally had a plant, but when the plant died, because, I kill everything that I try to grow. But when the plant, didn't last, died, I kept the ceramic pumpkin. And I was like, why don't I have a separate container for spooky topics that I want to talk about that interest me, or I think that would be interesting to discuss. And as I was mulling around in my head, I was like, why not my little ceramic pumpkin? So Pumpkin Jack is here, and I don't know if you can hear, but I have quite a many topics in here. But the one I pulled for this episode is about Poveglia Island. And if you've never heard of this island, I don't blame you. It just recently kind of came up to me not too long ago myself, before I started putting the workings of this podcast together and all the spooky stuff. But I thought it was pretty interesting, and I wanted to talk about it. So, alrighty, here we go. So, Poveglia Island. It is a small island in the Venetian lagoon of northern Italy, located between Venice and Lido. And it's divided into two parts by a canal. But it's actually a group of 3 islands, one of which happens to be artificially built. In the ancient maps, Poveglia was referred to as Poveglia, or Poveglia. And please excuse my pronunciations. But yeah, it was first mentioned by people from Padua and Este, who chronicled their journey from their old homes to Poveglia in around 421. I couldn't find if that was BC or current era, but the reason why they traveled to Poveglia was because of invasions by barbarians, and that forced them out of their homes back then. Some historical records indicate that a group of Eugani, or what is often referred to as Proto-Italians, had inhabited the island around 2000 BCE, but had abandoned it, and it didn't really have an actual population until that 421. And the population didn't really flourish and grow until around the 9th century, and eventually became governed by an Italian magistrate, or podesta. When Venice came under attack by the Genoan fleet in the year 1379, current era, the population on Poveglia was relocated to nearby, and I'm going to horribly butcher this, Giudecca, Giudecca Island. As a result, Poveglia remained uninhabited for a long time. Then, in 1527, the Doge, an elected head of state, offered the island to a group called the Camaldolese monks. And these were a group of a religious sect of monks. But they refused. Starting in the year 1645, the Venetian government built 5 forts to control and protect the lagoon, and only one of them happens to be still standing, and that is the artificial island that was built, that I mentioned earlier. The Public Health Office, or the Magistrato alla Sanità, took over the island in 1776 and transformed it into a checkpoint for goods and people traveling to and from Venice via ship. However, it was during this time that the plague, as in the Black Plague, big nasty, arrived on the ships. And in 1793, the island became a confinement place for the ill, also known as a lazaretto. And this is kind of where the dark history of the island starts. I mean, it was kind of a little bit of a dark one because of people who arrived on it due to their homes being sieged and burnt and taken over. But now this is when it really starts. And the plague had been around for quite a long time, quite a few centuries before 1776 and 1793, but this was a resurgence, and this is kind of where the majority of it took place around. And that's just according to the research that I found. And I will list all of my sources, of course, in the show notes. So, Napoleon Bonaparte made the island a permanent quarantine zone in the year 1805, and that lasted until 1814, when it was finally closed. Any existing buildings were converted into an asylum in 1922. And in between the 1814 and 1922, the island was abandoned. No one went there, no one lived there. And this asylum focused on treating the mentally ill. However, the asylum did not last very long and was later converted into a nursing home, which operated until around 1969, around that time. For a brief period, the island was used for farming and agriculture before it was completely abandoned and left on its own. And it remained that way for decades until 2014, when the Italian government put it up for auction with a 99-year lease. The idea was, by keeping the island as state property, a buyer would renovate the hospital there and transform it into a luxury hotel or something. A businessman named Luigi Brugnaro placed the highest bid for it at 513,000 euros, or approximately 565,857 US dollars. However, it didn't proceed to the next step due to his project being deemed to not meet all of the lease conditions. And while he did fight for it for a time, he eventually gave up on the island after becoming the mayor of Venice. A year later, in 2015, a group called Poveglia wanted to raise approximately 30 million euros to renovate the island by creating a public park, a marina, a restaurant, a hostel, and a library center. But that didn't work out either, and it is still vacant. The only buildings that still stand on the island are a cabana, or covered shelter for boats, a bell tower, staff buildings, a church, a hospital, and an asylum. Of all of those, the bell tower is the most easily visible, and it originally dates back to the 12th century and was originally part of the San Vitale Church, but that church was demolished in 1806. The bell tower was then repurposed into a lighthouse. The Italian Psychiatric Department has confirmed the existence of the asylum, but not of a prison. So, there was speculation for a time that there was not just an asylum, but also a prison on the island, but that prison has not been confirmed. A bridge connects the two parts of the natural island where a short river flows, allowing access from the section that has the infrastructure to the section that's been left to overgrown vegetation, trees, and fields. And the octagonal fort, the third, section of Poveglia that was artificial is nearby the building portion. So it's not closer to the portion that is overgrown, but is closer to the infrastructure. Now, on to what I think is some of the spooky stuff. So, back when Poveglia was serving as a quarantine for those who had the plague or who had already died from it, yes, even the dead were sent here if they died of the plague, so literally no one was safe if you had the plague. Death pits awaited them. These pits were where the dead were thrown into. Very deep. They were full. Once they were full, they'd either be set on fire or covered in dirt. Yeah. And it wasn't just strictly the dead that were thrown into these pits. Sometimes people who were still alive, but barely, were also tossed into these pits. So let's take a step back and try and picture yourself during a time where the bubonic plague was still widely feared. If you even showed a slight symptom of the plague, you would be sent to this island where thousands of people were already waiting, were either incredibly sick, dying, or dead. And it was so overrun with people that the ones kind of looking over or watching over all of this felt that they needed to dig deep, large pits and throw people into them. And if you were unlucky enough, you could be thrown into one of these pits along with dead, rotting bodies or people that barely had any life left in them. And you were either buried alive or you were set on fire. Let that sink in. That's part of the reason why I thought that Poveglia was a good spooky topic. Because I know that just thinking about that does, creeps me out for sure. Anyway, moving on. So because of these death pits and what were done, it led to a legend that Poveglia is made of 50% dirt and 50% human ashes. Over 160,000 people were sent to this island. And again, even those with the mildest symptoms were forced to go there. It's said that once the mental asylum was instituted in 1922, a doctor, and I found that he, in one source I found, he was referred to as Dr. Paolo, carried out numerous horrible experiments on the patients. So you have to think back in 1922, listen, as someone who has depression and anxiety and, it's hard enough in this day and age sometimes to function or even try to live as normal a life as you can, because sometimes that doesn't happen. Sometimes it's hard. But just think back then, in 1922, you could have anxiety, like a mild case of anxiety. You could be sent to one of these insane asylums. And I'm sorry if that's not PC to say, but I'm just using the terms. You could be sent to these hospitals. And even I read for a different asylum here in the States that if you had asthma, like a physical, actual medical condition, which I have, you could be sent to these insane asylums. And more than often, either treated horribly, experimented on, or just left to die. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to get on a tangent there, but it's, again, the asylum was a large part of why I wanted to do this. So, in an attempt to cure insanity, Dr. Paolo performed lobotomies, electroshocks, and force feeding on the patients, often using cruel methods such as hand drills or a hammer and chisel to do lobotomies. Patients were chained to beds or left in dark rooms for days on end. According to the locals, some of these tools can still be seen in the hospital rooms. An unknown amount of people were taken to the bell tower for a special kind of torture, and this special kind of torture has since been lost to time. And this went on for many, many years. But, in a little bit of kind of karma, the doctor, Dr. Paolo, claiming he'd been driven mad by his very own patients, threw himself off of the bell tower to his death. It is unclear if the doctor actually committed suicide or was thrown by someone else. While the asylum was still operational, patients claimed to see the ghosts of the plague victims. And during the night, the screams of these ghosts kept them up. Of course, no one believed these claims. The structure was shut down permanently in 1969 and abandoned once again. Voices, screams, laments, and other strange noises can allegedly be heard at night. Researchers have recorded an electromagnetic field within the island's perimeter, even though there is no electrical source on Poveglia. Many have reported a sense of dread or unease that wash over them, just being near it, and a few even have claimed to have been pushed or physically attacked by unseen forces. People claim the island smells of death and decay. Charred bones have even washed ashore to this day, according to the local populace. Legends say that fishermen tend to stay away from Poveglia out of fear of pulling human remains from their nets. A couple shows have featured Poveglia on a few episodes, to being Scariest Places on Earth and Ghost Adventures. While the general public are absolutely forbidden to step foot on the island, paranormal investigators are able to gain access to it, but it's through very tight means. And not only that, but there are boat tour companies that will take visitors on a tour around the island, telling stories of it from the safety of the lagoon's waters. So this is a place that they do not want you to go. And if you go without permission, you will get into big trouble. And that's what I have for you. Most of what I found during my research repeated the same history, and when I tried to get into like individual ghost stories, I could not really find any, except for a lot of, again, people saying that they heard screams and voices from the plague victims and stuff like that. But the ghost stories aren't really what scare me when it comes to places like that. It's the history, knowing that what happened to the people there happened in a relatively, recent era. I mean, granted, even if it was a couple hundred years ago, when you take in the thought of how old the earth is, that's really not that long time ago. And I mean, granted, this was back when we really didn't know better as a people, as a species. And with that, that's all I have for you on Poveglia Island. I know it didn't seem like much, but I still hope that you got a little spooked or creeped out by it. I know I certainly did when doing my research on it. Before I go into my little my little box for the topic of next week's episode, I want to do a quick card pull from my Zodiac Tarot deck by Cecilia Latari and Ana Chavez. I'm just gonna, I already shuffled it once before I started recording this, but I want to do it a little bit again. I don't know if the microphone's able to catch up on my shuffling or not, but anyway, here we go. Alright, so 9 of Cups. Alright, I don't think we've gotten that one before, but I'm not gonna lie, I can't remember. My memory, not the best, not going to lie. Jupiter in Pisces. The 9 of Cups is the card of fulfilled desires. It can't be any other way, since here, Pisces and thus the inner world, emotions, and dreams meet Jupiter, the planet of success, expansion, and fulfillment. Pisces carries emotional depth and fullness that foretells the arrival of truly happy days. If we want something, here, we know it's about to happen. The cups are almost complete. 9, the number before 10, invites us to a place of full and joyous expectation, because we know something beautiful is about to arrive. Keywords are fulfilled desire, waiting happily. And that's our card for the week. And now, time to... I have a couple years ago, I went to Spirit Halloween, and they had some Nightmare Before Christmas stuff, and I bought a hollow book that has Jack on Moonlight Hill in front of the full moon, and it says The Nightmare Before Christmas, and that's what I put all of my topics in, because I like that. So I'm going to reach in here and grab one. There we go. And see. Alrighty. Well, that's going to be interesting. I thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast and today's episode. I hope I was able to give you a little bit of the creeps. I know, again, I certainly got creeped out reading and learning about Poveglia. Tell me what you think. How do you like the spooky episode? Would you like me to do more? I do plan on it. But if you have any other suggestions for any topics, not just spooky ones, but also witchcraft related ones as well, please feel free to let me know. I do have a Facebook page for the podcast. It is, of course, called Every Which Way. And yeah. I also have an email. It's still the old email from when the podcast was Witch of the Gathering, so it's still Witch of the Gathering podcast at gmail.com. But if you are interested and would like, go ahead and send me an email. Send me whatever stories or spooky happenings that may have happened to you. And if you do, maybe I'll read whatever you send me, provided, of course, you give consent and it's okay for me to do so, obviously. And maybe I'll read them at the end of the next spooky one. Well, I thank you very much for listening in, but now I've got to go. I hope you all have a marvelously magical Monday and a wonderfully witchy week. Bye-bye now.